Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicating to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lit Happens. Today, the focus is cracking the code, HSC Advanced English Band Descriptors Explained. As always, we have Adriel as well with us today. Hi, Adriel.
Hey, Bill. How you going?
Good. Not too bad. We're going to get into the episode today that I know you're extra keen for. You've been doing a lot of work lately on the band descriptors and how that translates for assessment. So you guys are, in for a really good one. Adriel is going to take us through an unpacking of some of the tools and tips behind the descriptors. And before we get into that, though, we do want to get through our little segment that we have had going for a little while called Lit or Quit. So today, Adriel, this one's quite relevant for our topic. Lit or Quit, having your own copy of the syllabus that's got notes or it's transcribed, maybe have those little post-it bits on it. Having your own annotated kind of copy, lit or quit. I feel like this depends on whether you're a type A or type B person, but nonetheless, lit or quit.
I would say it's lit for sure, because every time you are looking at teaching your content, you are definitely looking at the syllabus, the rubric there, to inform your teaching. And I don't know about you, but my memory is shocking. So if I don't write my notes down on little post-it notes or whatnot, it just... I lose it. It goes in one ear, out the other, like our students. So I definitely think it is lit to have your notes ready to go, or else you're starting from scratch every sort of time you go to teach whatever you're teaching.
Yeah, that's so true. Look, I agree. I think it's lit, but it also makes my type A heart very warm and cozy. The thought of all the papers and the annotations. I will have to admit, I think it took maybe a good couple of years for me to get into having a really thorough understanding of all those, those because like with English, it's a lot. It's not just like one big one, like for example, a history and you've got your dot points. Like you're looking at the overall syllabus, then you're looking at prescriptions, then you're on NESA looking at like the assessment requirements and the band descriptors. So I do love it. It is lit. It is something that I always do now, especially when a new syllabus or prescription rolls around. It helps me really get into it, understand it. But I do feel like that was something I had to learn to do as well. And I definitely, in that first year, it was sink or swim. I was very much looking to the other staff members around me to support my understanding of the syllabus and what's required. Yeah, but I do love it, especially now with the new prescriptions. I know many of us have our own copies and they're all annotated and they're highlighted, and, we're maybe being a bit judgmental as we're going through them because we have other syllabus and prescriptions to compare them to. I think the first time you do it, it just is what it is, and then the more you've been in the job, the more you've been doing it, you've got that comparison. But I definitely think it's lit.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Everything that you've mentioned there. And like it evolves over time, sometimes I like that you mentioned, like we go into it with a big unknown because the English subject is a little bit more of a unicorn type of subject where we're not just looking at content-based dot points. And it is very important for us to actually look to our other faculty members in our staff room to help inform us. And that's why these collaborative sort of teaching spaces, which hopefully people are getting involved in now as we start to gear up and plan towards the new texts coming up. I know some of our older colleagues are doing these inter-school sort of connections and whatnot in order to unpack. I don't know what they're called, but those big events and meetings where they're speaking with lots of teachers from the local areas.
like
So
a gemstone community of
yeah,
schools, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
along those sorts
yeah,
of
a
lines
lot of
there.
link
So
up. I do too.
yeah,
And I've been hearing,
yeah,
and I know a lot of people are finding other schools in their network and kind of swapping resources to lower the load.
mm,
And I love that. I think that's
mm,
amazing. The more collaborative we are, the easier it is on us, I think.
yeah, 100%, 100%. So definitely lit
Yeah,
on this
yeah,
question here.
love
Yeah,
that.
100%.
As always, we'll put that in the socials. We'd love to get your opinion on this. But today's episode, we are looking at the band descriptors. One of our lovely listeners DM'd us and wanted some information on the bands in English, not only what they are and kind of understanding them, but how we get our students to understand them and how we actually consider them when we are actually doing our teaching things. So today we're going to cover for all of our lovely listeners what actually makes a band 6 response, how do bands 4 and 5 compare to that, and also just going through some, I guess, little key takeaways or some tips about what you can maybe support your students in knowing and understanding in regards to them approaching those band descriptors in their responses, and also maybe a few pointers and some discussion around what us teachers can be doing and what it looks like in our practice to be incorporating these band descriptors. So we
Yeah.
might just start then with our very first question. So, you know, as our reader asked, they want to know what is the actual purpose of our band descriptors? How do we as teachers use them when we're marking, creating assessments, you know, doing our scope and sequence, unit planning lessons? What are they? What is their purpose? And how do they, I guess, correlate to those things that we do in our daily teaching practice?
Yeah. I guess the way we sort of look at our band descriptors here is the fact that they are NESA's sort of benchmark tools. So what they do is they help NESA, ourselves, our staffs, our schools, define performance across those bands from 1 to 6 for all students in all of our English subject areas. So that can be either studies, standard, or advanced English. We're ensuring a level of consistency for our students. And this also helps us to be guided as teachers in supporting students to meet some of those syllabus outcomes as well. So I think Belle sort of mentioned this before. We start off with the syllabus, which is, you know, those syllabus dot points, those outcomes that we want our students to have achieved prior to the end of our teaching sequence. But we then look at the specificity of what we're going to teach through the respective rubrics or those modules that we come to. And this is where we'll start to jump into, you know, those different elements where we combine the syllabus and our rubric to understand these band descriptors. So I think there's a few ways we look at the purpose here. First of all, I sort of covered this. They help to define the standards. So what they do is they allow us to articulate expectations or our expectations. And we move from, let's go from like our band 3s and 4s, which are like our sound range responses, to then moving into the band 5 descriptors here, where we're looking at that verb effective. And then the next level there is the band 6 levels, which is the sophisticated level of response that we are getting from our students. And these are all as per NESA's sort of descriptors here. So you'll find all of this on their syllabus that they've provided. I think the other thing that we look at in terms of the purpose of band descriptors is there's a few others. They allow that idea of consistency, so that the standardized sort of marking across all schools. They help us to align our assessments with the syllabus outcomes. We are also able to sort of provide or support feedback. So a lot of schools have different methods to, you know, feedback and the approach that we take, whether it be EDF or whether it be, you know, a holistic approach to feedback, whether it be those different methods. I think these band descriptors help us to diagnose the strengths and weaknesses of our students and help them to move up the band scales. So I think that's very important. And I should note here, we will have students across a varying range of bands when it comes to our teaching. And yes, in a dreamt up world or perfect world, we would love all of them to be scoring their band 5s and 6s, but we know that that is not the case. So our role as a teacher then is to help them to achieve the best that they can by moving up their respective band descriptors as
Yeah.
per the student's individualized goals. And then that sort
Yeah.
of brings me to that last purpose here, which is what they allow is they guide the student goals. They show students what high quality work can look like, and they foster sort of reflection and ambition for students to move up the band descriptor scale there. Yeah, so there's a few sort of ideas and sort of in regards to our purpose and our band descriptors there. In regards to teacher application here, obviously they help to guide our marking. Again, this keeps it equitable and fair across all of the state. We got assessment creation as well, so they help to inform the development of our tasks. Now, we know that all assessments, in-school assessments, will not be the same across the whole state. However, when we look at aligning ourselves with these band descriptors, we have some sort of uniformity amongst the state. They allow for our scope and sequences and our unit planning to be drilled in so that we can help guide students towards those high-end responses. And then also we're looking at how these influence our lessons as well. So very, very important for us to consider this sort of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was fantastic. Thank you. Very, very thorough. There's two things I took away was one, it's a bit of a tool. It informs us as teachers what our benchmark is, creates a framework. I mean, it's if you're using it throughout. So not only when you're doing your reports and, you're selecting, where the student fits on that course outcome, but not only is it tied to outcomes, it's tied to your assessments, it's tied to your feedback, it's tied to all those things. And the other key takeaway, I think, as well, was that idea of it's meant to be quite fair and consistent and provide like that kind of sense of equality across all the different schools that are doing very different things. And if you're a new scheme teacher and you are wondering where do I actually find the write out of these band 6 descriptors, if you go to the New South Wales Education Standards website, and you kind of go through the subject area and like your advanced English, for example, you will come to quite a few different links, even like assessment reporting, but you'll find one for band descriptors. So Adriel has given a very, very good overview of what their purpose is and how we might apply them. But if you want that detail, just go there. All right. So obviously we want to be then encouraging student reflection when they're looking at different band responses. We all show samples so that they can see what high quality work looks like. I love the point that you made about every student is obviously different. It's about them achieving their personal best. So for some students, it might not necessarily be they're working to a band 6, but they're trying to work towards the next band depending on where they are. So I think that's a great strategy as well to help set some sort of meaningful goals there. All right. So we want to move on now to band 6. So Adriel, what is the big deal with band 6? Okay, what makes the band 6 response something that stands out in advanced English and is often what everyone is working towards in advanced English?
So when you're looking at the band descriptors as per NESA's sort of alignment there, we're looking at a student who is going to be demonstrating an extensive knowledge, an insightful understanding, and they provide a sophisticated evaluation. So it stands out by showcasing these critical original points, and also allows this idea of original thinking and a polished expression to be conveyed through what they produce on the day. So what does this look like when we're looking at its primary sort of application in our teaching world? I think it's important for us to understand these terms like extensive knowledge, insightful understanding, and a sophisticated evaluation. And they all sort of gear themselves towards this idea that students are developing their informed personal understanding. And I think we often miss that word informed, right? Not just a personal understanding, a sophisticated personal understanding. It needs to be an informed personal understanding. And this is where we get this idea of extensive knowledge coming in. So when we're getting into, let's say, a critical study, for example, I know for me, I'm currently going through Mod B with my students just prior to the HSC, and we really had to unpack what this term critical meant. And I always say to the kids, you need to have an extensive knowledge of your your text back to front, because if you don't, you're not showing that deep textual understanding. You're not going to be able to
Yes.
integrate your ideas across the entirety of the text, or even, cross-modular sort of things, if we're looking at Mod C, for example. So
Yes.
this is quite important for us to have drill into our students, because often you'll get students that will read like a review of the text, or maybe read the first 3 to 4 chapters, and then it's finished for them. But if they're not getting the whole text, if they don't have an extensive knowledge of the whole text that they are studying, well,
Yeah.
already we're not going to be able to showcase this extensive knowledge of the
Yeah.
text in its
They
entirety.
don't have the tools that they need to even achieve that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then we move on to like this idea: if they don't have that extensive knowledge of the text, they won't have an insightful understanding.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at in terms of insightful understanding is here we're looking at a student who offers original interpretations beyond surface meanings, and this is sort of where we start to look at the critique, and that sophisticated sort of critical lens,
Approach.
which
Yeah, lens,
that's
I love
right,
that.
which we move into. You can also look at maybe that sophisticated evaluation where they critically assess how context, audience, form shape the meaning, the different ways of reading into a text. I think these are the different points that allow those band sixes to really shine from the rest. And it's something that if you have a top end students, you want them working towards. If we move on to like other things, we do want a deeper analysis of techniques within the respective text that they're looking at. So they're analyzing a broad range of language forms, technique structures, language, all that sort of stuff with precision. I think that's very,
Yeah.
very important. I mentioned this idea of informed or refined personal response, where the student's going to be presenting critical, analytical arguments, not just mere opinions, and then that's sort of what will distinguish your bands 2s, 3s, then 3s to 4s, and then 4s to 5. And this in particular is the differentiator between your band 5 and 6. I think the band 6 responses are the students that will be providing it with a coherence and a logic that we sort of discussed in last episode, if you haven't listened to it already. But we've looked at a few of these terms. So go back, revise, maybe listen through that, and hopefully we give you a few little flakes of gold there. And I think the last thing really is this word I've seen quite a bit when it comes to the HSC. It's like a sustained flair and originality. Okay, so if it's an imaginative piece, their writing is imaginative, yet it's precise and sophisticated. And this is sort of what will move this into that band 6 response there. So why does that band 6 sort of response stand out? Well, remember, it's highly developed. We're looking at this word sophisticated. We'll probably do an episode where we define each of these terms with a little bit more depth.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
I think listen out, maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have this coming through. But when we're looking at these descriptors, we're looking at a combining of, this nuanced analysis, module alignment, and polished expression, which, unlike maybe those band 5's responses, which are effective in nature, they're just a little less original in terms of the response. I think that's quite important. And the way we sort of look at teaching these elements here is we need to model sophistication for our students. So I know a lot of us already do this, where we might give students like a band 6 exemplar to highlight insight and sophisticated responses. But it's important that we do actually go through these, we model them, we get them to highlight things, we get them to annotate, we get them to write notes, and maybe even compare them to your band 4 and 5 responses and ask students to note what the difference is. I think that's quite significant. And you can do this with the verbs, the difference between sound, effective, and sophisticated. Model 3 different paragraphs. See what happens. Teaching synthesis.
I think that's useful.
I think teaching synthesis is quite important. So, how do we allow students to engage with textual integrity, for example, integrating module concepts into our responses, but also making sure we're doing this within the timed manner, because remember, the HSC is not a test of how well they can do overall. It's how well they can perform under pressure, under those time conditions. So it's very important to encourage that originality
Yeah.
in those time
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
then
it's
also
good for, yeah, sorry, go on.
sorry, and then it's also important that we refine our expression as well. All right, so
Hmm.
that's probably the big thing as well. At the end, they start simple, but then as they continue to draft their pieces, we start to look at our expression and we look to see, what will maintain that sustained flair and that insight in regards to our responses.
Yeah, fabulous. No, you've given some great information there on what makes something a band six response, a response that stands out. I think your strategy of, looking at those different band responses with the students just so they can visually see it, but that's a fabulous strategy for a new scheme teacher as well, because we do as teachers have to learn the difference. I know early in my career, depending on the schools that I taught at, you don't know what you don't know. So you might think that something is maybe effective or maybe sophisticated, but it also depends on the cohort that you're working with. And, you and I both know we have some years where, the cohorts can be really strong, and it's really about making sure we're ranking those, band fives and sixes. And some year you've got a real mix, you've got a mix of the top, the middle, and perhaps some low ones. So I think it's really good for teachers to be mindful that they themselves have a lot that they can learn from looking at these exemplars and trying to work out, well, what are those responses doing that are making it that A range? And that will then help as well you be able to give feedback to your students about what makes that an A range. But I add the last thing as well is your focus on like flair, originality, sustainment. I think that for me is always, like, I just recently marked advanced English module C imaginative responses, and I know that those words were constantly swimming in my ears as I was looking at those responses, because a piece can be quite good and it can be effective, but we need to then think about, according to those different text types, what's the thing that the responses that are representing flair and originality, what are they doing that perhaps the Bs are not? And then that even becomes, once you can consider that can become part of your marking feedback as well. All right.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a lot more on this in future to EPS too, but that was amazing. Well, let's move on then to band 5. So obviously band 5 is still quite a good response, particularly advanced English. A band 5 is still going to scale you fairly well. So why don't we just talk a little bit now about how does a band 5 compare to a band 6? What might be the difference there in that response?
Yeah, okay. So remember, a band 5 response here is still strong. It still demonstrates a detailed knowledge, a perceptive understanding, and we see this word, an effective evaluation. However, it falls short of your band 6 responses because of its nuanced or lack of nuanced sophistication. And I think that's probably the big thing that we want standing out here. So some of those features we sort of already mentioned, they do provide a detailed knowledge, so a strong understanding of the text, and they still engage with the module concepts. They provide that perceptive understanding, so they offer clear, thoughtful interpretations. And this is why it can be quite touchy when it comes to students. Oh, well, why didn't I get a band 6, or why didn't I score in those ranges? This idea of nuanced sophistication is something that we probably need to look at. If you're struggling as a new scheme teacher, have a look at some of the responses that maybe some of your more experienced colleagues might have. They will have a good understanding of what separates it, and once you see it, visualize it, it does help you to understand it quite a bit. So really speak with your faculty if you are struggling with this. I think it also provides a band 5 response will still have a strong analysis. So they do analyze the techniques well, though this is probably the important thing. They're not as deeply analyzed as a band 6 response. And this is sort of where we start to see some of that nuanced sophistication. And they do still, they still have a critical personal response. So they still present that well-developed argument, but they lack the band 6's originality. Okay, so it's probably something that sounds a lot more like it's been, what would we say, more mechanical. That's probably the big thing.
I think that's a really great way to differentiate that idea of mechanical, because they might be talking about like the effects of the techniques and all that. But I think the difference is the band sixes will really be looking at the relationship between the techniques, the effect on meaning, the relationship to purpose and context. They're just doing it a bit more holistically as well, I think.
Yeah. And I think like the last one, we sort of mentioned this previously, but the flair and originality. So the writing is controlled and original, but less precise than a band six. So again, it goes more into that mechanical sort of nature there. So if we're looking at like a comparison between the band sixes here, if we're looking at knowledge, where we're looking at, detailed versus extensive knowledge. So a band six response will be more comprehensive. If we're looking at understanding, the band five is perceptive, if put against like the band six, which is insightful. So more originality in terms of understanding. If it comes to evaluation, we see that the band five is effective again, whereas the band six there will be sophisticated, so more critical in nature. The analysis is in a band five response will be well developed versus the band six is highly developed. So there's a deeper range when we're looking at the analysis there, so deeper level of analysis. And then when you're looking at the response and the writings, so a band five response will have a critical sort of response or a little bit of flair. However, when we're looking at the band six, it will still be critical. However, it's more refined, so more nuanced. And then the flair will be sustained across. So it's more polished. I think that's it's quite significant. So we'll probably put this list out there to maybe put it up on our socials and put this little chart up for teachers to have a look at to differentiate between that band five and six response. If we're wanting to look at some teaching strategies here for moving our students from those band five to six responses, some of the things that I've sort of gathered across the years is we want them to deepen their analysis. So here we'll look to teach students to analyze less obvious techniques. Looking at techniques that you might just not find on those basic websites that we look up on Google, but really see that real engagement with the text. And then also using that timed practice as well. So how well they can produce that under those time conditions. To enhance synthesis, you're going to require an integration of context and module terms. In responses to achieve that band six's insightful synthesis. Engaging with originality. This is a tough thing because if your students aren't reading enough, that's where we start first of all, making sure they're reading widely, reading commentaries, having critical sort of perspectives and approaches to the text. This is where we need to encourage the students to look at alternative perspectives to develop the refined responses. And then polish expression. So, you might even go back to like sentence level revision workshops where you elevate the flair, to more of a sustained flair in regards to their writing. And again, this comes over time. It's not going to happen straight away. And this is where we start to emphasize why drafting is very, very important to get students across the band descriptor sort of ranges there.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And I think if you're thinking about, well, what if they're doing, creative writing and it's mod C, and how do I move them from that 5 to that 6? Again, that idea of nuance, your band 6 narratives will have a much more mature, more nuanced perspective on perhaps an idea or theme that might, because if your Bs might be representing it, but maybe at a slightly more literal level, like it's effective, but it's not offering a really nuanced or conceptual sort of perspective. And the way that they're using crafting features like language forms and features to represent their purpose and intent in their story will not be as sustained. They might have some good, metaphor and imagery and stuff like that, but you're moving into that band 6, they're going to be using those stronger, bigger structural techniques that connect and weave through the entire piece, like your extended metaphors, your motifs, your symbolism, and they're often tied to the purpose as well. Okay, that's really helpful, Adriel. Well, we're getting towards the final couple sections here, so maybe we might just talk a little bit about band 4 and then some key takeaways. So what's then happening in a band 4 response? What does that look like, and where does that sit along this, bands spectrum.
Yep, cool. So your band 4 responses here demonstrate that sound, knowledge, and understanding with a developed interpretation and analysis. So this here, we're looking at the middle of the range, or the upper middle range, and we're seeing that the students are showing some form of competence, but they lack the depth of the band 5 and 6 responses. I think that's quite important. So again, the terminology that we're looking at, and again, it's very important to get the students to understand these verbs and these terms. And again, we'll do an app on this with a bit more depth, but what your band 4 responses will look like, they'll have like that sound understanding where the student will grasp how meaning is shaped, but it stays surface level. There is a clear but descriptive analysis. So they identify techniques, but they explain rather than evaluate or analyze. The familiar technique, so they stick to the obvious examples without a range of exploration when it comes to these techniques. They have a developed interpretation, so they show some analysis, but they lack the synthesis of your higher band descriptors. They're confident in their writing, so it's controlled, but lacks that band 5 flair or the band 6 sophistication. And then they also, like, it's quite important to understand this. They are still using appropriate context, so they address the audience and context, but this is less refined. So even to score in that band 4 range, you still need a level of understanding which is quite significant. So where does this fit? A band 4 is competent. Okay, so it's above those bands 1 to 3, which might show more of those limited sort of minimum skills, but below the band 5's perceptive analysis and the band 6's insightful synthesis. So what, like, I like to look at like your band 3s and 4s, they look to be more descriptive rather than critical. And this means that they align more with NESA's sound descriptor in that range. And how do we shift then from, these band 4s to the 5s and 6s? Well, you're looking at teaching them the verbs. I think this is quite important. Looking over verbs like analyze, over describe, using your peel structures or whichever writing platforms you're using to achieve your band 5s and the effective analysis. Expanding their technique vocab. So introducing various techniques or varied techniques to move beyond those familiar examples. And, they're building their own technique glossaries as we go along the teaching of each respective unit. I think linking to the module as well. So require one module sort of term where you're aligning your paragraphs with band 5's rubric sort of focus. I think that's quite important. So we're always going back to the module focus, the concept or that conceptual umbrella. And then you want to build those critical responses as well. So practicing evaluating how and why, technique, shape, meaning to target band 5 and 6 sophisticated evaluation.
Yeah, no, fabulous. That's really helpful. Okay, I think you've done a very, very good breakdown of the 6, the 5s and the 4s. Maybe just to, get to the end of our episode now and wrap this up a little bit, we might just talk about some sort of takeaways and, final tips and suggestions. So let's do firstly, what should students aim for when they are trying to level up their writing through the bands?
Yeah. Alrighty, so a few things here. You want to analyze how and why technique shape meaning. You want to anchor your understanding and your informed personal response in context, audience, and purpose. There's some big things there. You want your responses to show depth and independence of thought. Draft and refine. This is big for sophistication. So really encourage the drafting process. Now it's difficult, because obviously they do 5 to 6 subjects and students will be students like ourselves as well, who are once there. Unless you're completely diligent and studious, it's very hard to actually go through all of that. But also, encouraging that feedback and that process of gaining feedback in order to progress. I think those are 4 or 5 different strategies there that we can get our students to aim for in order to move up those band descriptor ranges there.
No, I think that's really, really helpful. And then just, some things that maybe teachers can do to support the students in that. You just said it then, and I think it's so important too, is being able to offer feedback, helpful feedback to move students through that band analysis. And again, if you're not sure, that is okay, because we all learn as well. If you're new scheme and you're not sure, do a bit of work around that. Examine the different band responses, because you can still find some on NESA. Like you said earlier, Adriel, look to your more experienced staff and maybe sit down with them and ask them to help you see the difference, because I know I could not give effective feedback unless I could see it. And if I didn't learn, I couldn't see it. So I think that's something as teachers to be really, really mindful of. The students don't know. They are looking for your guidance. They don't just automatically know, oh, this is a 5 or a 4 or a 6. But even I think encouraging them in the younger years as well, like year 9 and year 10, to, consider, when we give them back their assessments and they calculate, they get an A or a B or a C, like even I think taking those opportunities when the students get their responses back and having them do some evaluation and reflection on their work and why they received the mark and grade that they did will also help for students to see that eventually as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like important for us to really understand that these descriptors aren't like set in concrete. They're skills, as per like the English sort of syllabus, that, skills, you have to develop them over time, and you have to continue to refine those skills in order to, or continue to add to them in order to not only just maintain those skills, but in order to add value. And this is something that we learn throughout life. Teaching is that lifelong sort of journey. And I think this is why English is important. Students have been asking me recently, like, oh, I wish I could drop English because there's no one response, or I find it difficult and all of this. But I sort of keep reflecting and harping on with my students, saying that this will set you up for life, not just for success in the HSC. What we're doing is we're fostering critical thinking for you, so that you're coming into a world where you're maintaining some of your human sort of thought and your processes. You're not just becoming a part of this generation who might mindlessly follow trends, or, I like to use this term, we don't just become sheeple, do we?
I love
because
that. Sheeple.
That's right, because we're allowing critical thinking, or we're demonstrating abilities to think on your own. And I think that's so important for us to understand and really empower our students with. And this is why writing is important. This is why understanding these band descriptors that NESA provide us is very, very important. And I think it's a worthwhile life skill that we are teaching our students. So it's something that we should have the passion in addressing and really make it relevant to their lives. I think the more we harp on about it, hopefully bits and pieces will sink in, and years down the track, they'll end up messaging you and saying, hey, thank you for getting us to think like this, or thank you for allowing this development of maturity. And I think that's quite important when looking at the band descriptors, is we are looking at developing these skills, not just for the HSC, but for life, and that's significant.
I love that idea of it's about their voice, and how well that can come through can be guided by those band descriptors as well. But it's about that perspective and that voice that we're all trying to encourage in our students. That's lovely. This has been really, I'm sure this is going to be a really popular episode. This is the type of, professional development that we don't often get a chance to have, but we wish we could. So thank you so much, Adriel. Remember, everyone listening, that, the bands aren't just, they're not about really ticking boxes. They're about the skills that the students have in demonstrating their thoughts, their process, their perspectives. So, it's really important that we pay our due diligence here, but also have our students to, keep going, keep refining, keep reflecting, and, keep working on the strength of their own voice as well. So that's been wonderful. I think we're going to end our episode then here. Adriel, anything else before we leave off?
I think it's important also, for those that are listening, I know NESA has adjusted their ways in which you guys get hours. I think you can just sort of pop many things in terms of your maintenance hours, or if you're looking at your accreditation hours now.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
I don't know how viable this is, but look, you're listening to our episodes. We're trying to get them out 30 to 40 minutes per week. this could be considered nice professional development for you. So it does align with a lot of the outcomes that you're addressing in terms of your PD and your maintenance
Yeah.
hours. And suss it out. You know, give us a listen. This may help with getting your maintenance 100 hours now. And, you know, give us a
Definitely.
like and a follow. I think it's definitely going to be helping. Those are for our English teachers in New South Wales. If you're listening internationally or whatever, thank you, first and foremost. And hopefully we'll get some
Yeah,
more
it's
sort
really
of
cool.
technical English sorts of things coming out for you guys as well. So thank you once again,
Yeah.
guys. Remember to follow us, give us a follow, give us a like, and continue to engage with us.